Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can find and subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our site, vmspod.com, to find more information, as well as our RSS feed, which you can plug into any podcatcher so you never miss an episode of the Virtual Memories Show. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube, where I go by vmspod, and subscribe to my semi-weekly newsletter at buttondown.com/vmspod. Well, I am back from a week in Europe. I had my pharma trade show in Frankfurt Tuesday through Thursday, landed Monday morning. Then I got out to London Thursday evening so I could spend 3 days just running around like a goddamn maniac to see friends and record a couple of podcasts. But I had some really, I'll say, beautiful conversations while I was there. I got to retrace some steps from past visits. Got caught in a thunderstorm with one of my best friends while we were walking along the Thames. Got more drenched than I've been in many, many years. Saw the place where I recorded one of my greatest podcasts. Talked with a new friend who I have inadvertently given a comics education to. I got to see a giant chunk of a cat and heard some harrowing stories about double lives, and I got to hear about Russell Crowe's moodiness and his generosity. Got to hold Julian Sand's crucifix. That was something. And it all kind of blends together. It was 72 hours that I was there, like 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock, Thursday to Sunday. And I am doing my best to keep the memories discreet, in place, to keep it all from fading away. To try to, kind of document the flow of all these blessings of my life. I mean, it's a lot, from the work side first, and then this crush in England. And I got home 10 o'clock on Sunday night, back to New Jersey, and had to dive right back into work the next morning. But I am still here for you. So let's get on with the show, listeners. My guest this time is the great designer, typographer, artist, novelist, illustrator, cartoonist, etc., Rian Hughes. Ryan's been on a couple of times in recent years as a remote guest, both times to talk about novels of his, XX and The Black Locomotive. But this time, A, we got together at his home in England, and B, the project we're talking about is no novel. See, Rian is in the midst of a Kickstarter at this moment. I'm posting this November 4th, 2025, and it closes November 20th, this Kickstarter. The project is called Typeractive, 30 Years of Device Fonts. And it's a catalog of every font that Rian has designed over the past 30 years for his Foundry device fonts. And he has made some incredible fonts. The samples of the book and the Kickstarter page, they just look incredible. He brings an incredible design eye to everything he does. These pages just look gorgeous. And they show off the fonts and all sorts of designs and all their different weights and the other aspects of each font family that he builds or has built. The book's also going to have some essays on his design process and notes about research. and more. Plus, at different tiers, you can actually get access to different fonts that he's designed, or even have Rian design a logo or font for you. Those are the higher end. I did not splurge quite that much, though I did go with the slipcase edition, which will get me a couple of fonts, some of which I may deploy and guest host in that book of mine. As background, I've been a mark for Rian's work since I saw his comic art in collaboration with Grant Morrison in the 1990s when they revamped Dan Dare, this I guess 1950s British comic character. Since then, I have always dug seeing his projects in the world, as well as some of the works that he's designed. And as I mentioned, he's been on previously to talk about his science fiction novels. And both of those, they lean into typography and design, I'll put it that way, to literally fantastic ends. They are unique experiences, both of these books. He does an awful lot with what is on the page and what a page can contain, what it can convey, while still keeping you kind of gripped in pretty entertaining science fiction narratives. And when we talked about getting together, actually, for this trip, he sent a PDF of the new novel that he's got, which we'll talk about during the show. And the night before joining him, I read about 20 pages of that, and it is visually mind-blowing and an absolute trip to read. You can see the seeds of where it's going from the outset. I got to see some digital preprints he'd done of it at his home, but that is going to be something. The other thing that really got me being at his place, seeing Typeractive on the Kickstarter page, you can kind of get his fonts and how they're deployed and what they do. But once I was at his home, I really got this. His deep sense of history really came out. It's not just the comics and he's got a very big affinity for science fiction paperbacks, and that was part of the Kickstarter he did called Ray Guns and Rocket Ships. But the deeper sense of history he has in typography, and the sense of not just understanding what the typefaces are, but the history and the art behind them. The personalities of the guys who are making these. And his catalog, Typeractive, really brings to the fore that knowledge. And like I say, the artistic traditions that are going on, the way those typefaces are reflecting what's going on in the broader cultural world. And he brings all that to bear to make new and innovative ones. But there's that sense of knowledge and respect of the history he's coming from. Anyway, I could go on and on about this stuff, but let's get to the show. You can find Typeractive on Kickstarter by searching for Rian Hughes. That's Rian. I'll have a link to it in the show and episode notes for this one. Otherwise, it's Typeractive, like hyperactive, but with a T. But anyway, if you're listening to this in anywhere close to real time, it closes November 20th, 2025. So go check that one out. It is totally funded, beyond totally funded. But there might be some more neat stretch goals that he adds to it all. We did talk about maybe setting the bar a little higher next time. Anyway, it was a joy to sit down with Rian and his girlfriend, who were kind enough to treat me to some dinner before we got to recording. And I got to say, it's kind of nice to not just be the guy who dashes in with some microphones, records a conversation, and then hurries out after. They really treated me well, and I needed that. Now, as caveats go, I got this weird distortion on my main recording setup, and I kept trying to sample it out, and it just didn't work. So we're going with the backup recorder that I use, a Zoom H2N. Sounds fine. You won't notice the difference. It'll burn up my soul, but whatever. Also, Rian was sitting on a leather chair, and he shifted around a couple times while we talked, so it makes some noise. And this one particular time, about 75 minutes into the conversation, it sounds like he's farting, but I swear to God, it was just the sofa. Now, here's the first paragraph of Rian's extensive bio from his website, rianhughes.com. Rian Hughes is a graphic designer, illustrator, writer, typographer, and sometime comic book artist who has worked extensively for the British and American publishing, music, advertising, and comic book industries. He has written and drawn comics for 2000 AD and Batman, Black and White, and designed logos for James Bond, the X-Men, Superman, Head Candy, and the Avengers, collected in the Eisner-nominated book Logo A Go-Go from Carrero Press in 2018. He has published 2 novels, XX, which came out in 2020, and The Black Locomotive in 2021. And now, the 2025 Virtual Memories Conversation with Rian Hughes. So tell me about Typeractive.
Typeractive is a book of every font that I've ever released. Device Fonts is 30 years old this year, so it seemed like a good marker to celebrate. So I thought that very few people are going to want to buy a book of fonts. So I didn't think I'd be able to convince a publisher to do it, but I'd done 2 previous books with Carrero Press, and both of them. Well, I've done several books with them. Logo A Go-Go was one of the first books that I did, but we did 2 that were kickstarted, and it turned out to be, first of all, it gets the book straight to your audience who otherwise might not find out about it, and second of all, it sort of pre-sells it, so it's not so much of a risk. You know how many of these you need to print. So I decided that this would be the first Kickstarter that I would do
solo.
Myself. Yeah, solo. And it launched a week and a half ago.
Yeah, so we're going to post this a few days after we record. So,
yes.
You know me, I turn things around quick. So.
Absolutely. And it's doing all right, much to my surprise.
Yeah, I saw the initial goal was very low, and you blew past that very, very quickly. I'm going to have to do one of these myself in a couple of months when I finally do my guest host Instax book. I've always been told you should go a little under what your real true goal is, because that gives people more reason to exceed and all that. But what was the philosophy, or what's the?
I had very low expectations.
Okay, there was that.
No, it was because it is an anniversary catalogue. I kind of saw it as a bit of a vanity project, and so primarily I thought, well, if I set the bar very low, and it ends up by costing me money, at least I'll have done it, and it'll be a record and maybe a sales tool if I have this catalogue. And I've been looking at all these old books that Stevenson Blake and Caslon and Figgins and all these old typographers, all these old hot metal foundries used to put out.
Yeah.
And they were beautiful objects, these big fat hardbacks, and I thought I'd like to do something like that in my vanity. And lo and behold, we've already got enough to make this happen. So I'm glad that there's more type nerds out there who are interested in this than I ever thought there would be.
Yeah, how has that world changed? I mean, you didn't know it was going to be that significant as far as people willing to buy or wanting to buy a book like this, but the type nerdery out there.
I think that typography went from being this very esoteric niche interest to being pretty mainstream. And I remember when I was first interested in type as a graphic designer, it was because I was familiar with Letraset. You remember that rub-down lettering product? And unless you were involved in graphic design, you probably didn't think much about typography. And then, of course, everyone had a computer and everyone had to choose a font, at least from
the
Times or Helvetica or Arial or whatever. They had to make some font choice. And all of a sudden everyone knew what type was. Whether that turns them into type aficionados, I don't know. But I think there is definitely a market for people who do enjoy this and have an interest in this that didn't exist 30 years ago.
And with the book being a 30-year collection of your font foundry, what was it like looking back at it? Well, you know, I don't know how often you revisit older designs you've done, and I'm sure we all have the things we look, oh my God, I can't believe I did X. But...
Well, you are learning how to design fonts in public, and the earliest fonts that I designed were released by Font Shop, which was Eric Spiekerman and Neville Brody's digital foundry. And in the early days, you would order a font and it would be posted to you on a floppy disk. So this is pre-internet. And they published probably 5 or 6 of my earliest font families. And they were very small families, maybe at most, say, 5 weights. And they were almost all headline type. So, you know, not the kind of stuff that you would set a book in, for example. But they acted as a kind of filter for some of my less polished work. But then, of course, what happened is that I was so prolific with the type that, because they had a quarterly release schedule, unless I literally dominated every release forthwith, which I wasn't.
Didn't want to be the guy with 90% of the catalog.
Yeah, it became apparent that I would have to set up my own foundry and release my fonts that way. So that's how Device Fonts ended up by coming into existence. And then eventually there was the website, and I licensed them to Adobe and through Monotype and so on and so forth. So it was that slow build through 30 years, probably more than that, because I think that it's probably close to 35 years, because if you include the fonts at the beginning, that was probably a period of 4 or 5 years before I set up Device Fonts. I mean, all those fonts have now been folded into the Device library.
Yeah.
So this book would include everything, you know, including all the commissioned fonts for various clients over the years. But revisiting them, to get to your question, when the technology changed from Type 1 and TrueType to OpenType fonts, I had to go back and remaster the whole library, and this was 10, 15 years ago. No, maybe even more than that.
I remember it vaguely, but obviously it wasn't my career. So,
well, the main difference is that OpenType was capable of containing so many more glyphs, and you could do things like ligatures and alternates and context-specific letters, so that a letter would automatically substitute depending on where it occurred in the word, for example. So it was a much more versatile and sophisticated format, but I had to go back and remaster all the old types, all the old typefaces. And yes, you do. So I corrected a few things. So with the benefit of hindsight, some of those early designs got a bit of an upgrade and a polish when that happened. But you know, it's like, I mean, we were talking earlier about musicians and about how the first album is full of ideas but a bit rough around the edges, and then you slowly learn your trade, and hopefully you don't end up by being a technical perfectionist with no ideas left.
You could say Oasis. I'm just kidding. We're in England, so I had to. But
there is that trajectory from inspired amateur to
burned out expert.
Yes.
Jaded. Yeah.
Well, yes, just spent expert.
Yeah.
And hopefully in the middle somewhere you get something that is both technically proficient and full of creative energy. So I hope that I'm still in that period. and I've certainly managed to sustain my interest in designing fonts over that period, and I don't see any tail off of that interest.
Besides the fonts themselves, what else has the book got within it?
It's not going to be a technical manual, but I will share some of what I've learned over that period. What is interesting is what sells and what doesn't sell, what finds a market, what becomes suddenly very popular and maybe catches a zeitgeist, and then 2 or 3 years after that, no one ever uses again. Whereas you'll get other fonts that just seem to sell and sell and sell very solidly year after year after year. And the main difference seems to be that the more versatile fonts are obviously the more widely used fonts, and the more characterful and esoteric and experimental fonts have a much more limited range of uses that they can be put to. So you will maybe labour on some experimental font that you will sell 5 copies a year of, whereas something like Korolev, which is my best-selling family, or Paralucent, or Urbane, they will sell a dozen copies a day. They show no sign of slowing down ever. But I don't think that the people who use those necessarily know that I designed them or have any interest in who created these fonts. They just
get that it functions. It really works for.
Yeah, they're just functional pieces of kit that they use in whatever it is that they're designing. So, I don't think that a lot of, probably the bulk of the users of type have any interest in type designers or typography or the esoteric aspects of the craft.
You think that, but the Kickstarter's doing a lot better than you thought it was.
Yes, exactly. Well, well, maybe I'm reaching that niche market, that esoteric
again, you may be
font nerd market.
Crossing into this liminal zone for this stuff. Did you see trends in the things you were doing, at least the ones you were designing for the Foundry as opposed to the commissions? When you started to see them extending through time, was there a sense of I was in a mode where I was always doing this sort of thing, or
I think that
were there changes?
Yeah, I think you could ask the same question about any creative person. How much of what you do either follows trends or is influenced by trends, and how much of it is your own personal vision and voice.
I mean, even trends within your own work, whether you see, I was in a sort of mode for a while, this type of font, as opposed to, external trends too, but either or. Did you see those things in retrospect?
I grew up with, as I said, with Electroset and these headline photo setting catalogues that took us probably through into the mid to late 80s before Fontographer and digital type really displaced those. And a lot of those type designs were headlines, very flamboyant, drop shadows, all kinds of esoteric experimental headline faces, and I think that was my prime influence. So I would say that, and I still do a lot of type that is like that, but it took me a while to come around to feeling confident enough to design a fully functional family with, say, 6 or 8 or however many weights with matching italics, from a very light to a very heavy, and maybe even a condensed italic as well, which is a major undertaking. And the first time I attempted a large family was Paralucent, and Paralucent, it still sells amazingly well. This is 30 years down the line, maybe 25 years down the line. So that encouraged me to to explore these larger families where, in order for them to be widely useful, you've really got to not make them boring so much, but what gives them the character is not necessarily a flamboyant serif or some other
little effect.
Yes, some. It's not something that happens on an individual character so much. It's an overall look that text set in a paragraph might have. So you're looking at really subtle aspects of characters that aren't particularly prominent in and of themselves, but when you have a whole block of text set in this font, it really does have a character that comes to the fore then. And that's a kind of more subtle and deeper level of type design. And I think that after Paralucent, I realised that I should probably explore this more. And so Salient, for example, is my take on a kind of Bodoni or a stressed font with fine serifs, but an entirely modern take on that. It's not a historical revival of anything. And Urbane was my investigation of, say, the early modern sans, like Paul Renner's Futura, for example. Again, not a revival, not a pastiche, but it's almost like you look at the ideas that underpinned that font and what was happening in graphic design and modernism in the sort of early 30s when that was designed, and think, how would I articulate those ideas? Rather than just look at the shape of a bowl or a serif or an ascender, what is the milieu in which these fonts arose, and how would I go about articulating that myself? And again, with English Grotesque, I went and looked at the English sign writing tradition, which is where people like Gill and Johnson Railway, for example, come out of that tradition. And as opposed to the sort of European modernist sans, which was quite ruder and compass geometric. So you would have Futura and Neuzeit, and there was quite a few other ones that were designed around that time. The British modernist sans serif still held on to quite traditional Roman Trajan proportions. So Eric Gill's Gill Sans still has a very wide T, still has a leg on the R that looks like a Roman leg might look. It's like he couldn't fully become modern. He was imbued with this respect for the tradition of calligraphy and sign painting. And so the English modernism was never as brutally and purely modern as European modernism was. And American modernism also fell into that trap. It was a bit twiddly and twee and never entirely as pure as it could be. So English Grotesque was me kind of leaning into that and looking sort of through Gill to his sources and the sort of English sign painting tradition that he was drawing on, and thinking, if I was around in the late 20s, early 30s, and I'd been asked to do a modern sans, what might it look like? And if I'd have gone to the source, what might it look like?
At the same time, do you think of what these guys would have done with digital tools, and knowing that that's embedded in, where design went, overall, how the great tradition you talk about, what they would have approached the contemporary era like? Or is that what you're doing in the process of making what you make?
What would Caslon or Stevenson Blake or Figgins have done with digital tools? I really don't know. That's a good question. I think a lot of the early woodblock type, it's quite crude. Not all of it by any means, but it was jobbing type. They weren't really too concerned about the finesse, and you can tell this because the type was available in many different point sizes, and an S, for example, will differ quite considerably between point sizes. So if you look at one point size and you puzzle about why the S is a specific shape, why is it got this weird lump here or this angle there, and then you look at the next size up and it's slightly different, and you look at the next size up and it's different again, and you realise that these aspects that you were obsessing about are just
artifacts,
random noise. So, and you can see this even with Cancelon, say with hot metal setting, is that the characters do change quite dramatically point size to point size, because each one was made with a different punch. So each punch would be handmade, and they obviously have a continuity of style, but I was amazed at how varied they are. So obviously in the digital world, every point size is identical. And some people would argue that variation gives them warmth, that what the punch cutters did as the type got smaller is that they would beef up the narrow serifs, maybe open up the bowls so that they wouldn't get clogged with ink. So they would adjust the design of the type to work at smaller or larger sizes, which is a different thing from what I'm describing, because the differences that I became aware of were all in fairly large type, so they weren't differences that were done primarily for
so things didn't all run together.
Yes, they weren't trying to solve technical issues due to small print or ink fill. They would just variations in the form that had accidentally occurred. So there would have just been the one version of each font. Would that be pure and better and lack warmth and humanity? Maybe. Who knows?
When you're looking at the old ones, do you remember who you were at different times? Do they trigger any sort of, I remember what I was doing around the time I was designing this? I figure anecdotes.
They do. Some of my fonts were designed for specific uses. So there's a font that I designed for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because I redesigned their brand and logo, and because a lot of these global brands need localized versions of the logo, so there'll be whatever the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is in French and Spanish and Italian and whatever, is that it quickly became apparent that it would be easier if I just designed the font and then they could localize, basing it on my original design, all these different versions, and it would sort of let me off the hook. I wouldn't have to do all this myself again and again. So there were definitely fonts that sort of put me back in the mindset of where I was in my career when I was working on these things. I would say that there were a lot of fonts that are not my fonts, but I first saw on a book cover or a record sleeve or a comic, and I associate intimately with a specific time or character or magazine or period of music or whatever it was. And I think that one of the most beautiful things about type is how specific and evocative it can be. You can, if I showed you a sort of bell-bottomed rounded font from 1969, you would be transported right back there. Or
on this coffee table, you have that collection of Kirby and Lee Fantastic Fours, and just that lowercase serifed font for the FF. Having that in front of me right this whole time, it's just everything about it just brings me back to, who I was reading these comics as a kid. But,
well, I think this is you're getting to the crux of one of the things I find so intriguing and seductive about type, is that there are two aspects to type. There is what it says and how it says it. So there's the content of the words that you are reading, and then there's how the words look as graphic shapes on the page. And this is how I ended up by writing XX and the Black Locomotive. It became apparent to me quite early on that you could communicate so much more with the style of the type. Well, not so much more, probably as much with the style of the type as you could with the content of the type. And it was a tool set that very few writers had played with. And this is where the idea of XX came from, is that if I experimented with large type, small type, bold type, light type, a single character that fills an entire page, type so small that you can barely read it, how do these tricks sounds a bit pejorative. How do these
techniques,
yes, broaden the expressive language of the novel and what you can do with the novel? So that is how I approached XX. But prior to that, I had spent 25 years designing fonts and immersing myself in the idea that every typeface has a character, an essence that it's communicating, a sense of fun or academic seriousness or clean modernism or frivolity. All of these can be evoked with the style of type.
And your realization you could bring those into character in the form of narrative. That's
and in the Black Locomotive, which is much more toned down typographically than XX, but every character in the Black Locomotive had their own font.
Yeah.
And I hope that you would get from that a sense of who they were and how they spoke. And again, I think it's almost such an obvious trick that I don't know why all novels aren't like this. It's not. Nowadays, with digital printing and type, it's not a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, you don't have to have some guy laying out all these
Yeah. It's not a typesetting problem.
I'm sure I've told you this before, but in one of our other conversations, I started out in business-to-business magazines before becoming the weird person I am now. And it was in the age of Quark, luckily, and PageMaker, because the guys I was working with, we all had to lay out our own pages. There were templates we worked with, so it wasn't like we had to invent from the ground up. But the old-timers, anyone older than me, was used to paste up. And I said, if I had to make magazines like this, it would look like a serial killer was making them, and I would not have a job here. So luckily, digital tools enabled me to fake my way through, being a layout guy for a bunch of years. But
well, I think that's how the aesthetic of punk arrived. It was people doing paste up who had never done paste up before because they wanted to do a fanzine.
Yeah.
So you could say that the aesthetic arose out of the limitations of the tools, but
we would have
sometimes those limitations generate interesting possibilities.
So, do you have? I assume you have plenty of experiences of seeing your fonts out in the wild.
Yeah, it's
and do they get tweaked and mutated? Do people?
There have been instances where where advertising agencies have sold clients custom fonts that are nothing of the sort. They're basically fonts, my fonts, that someone has opened, changed the angle of the foot on the K or something like this and renamed it and sold it on as a custom font. And there's a piece of software that's very good at analysing the two fonts and finding out whether one is derived from the other, because fonts essentially at the digital level are strings of noughts and ones, and if you have
95% of them
are identical, you know that someone has stolen your font. Yeah. So there have been a few court cases where this has happened. I mean, the Walls Ice Cream font, for example, is Regulator. It's one of my fonts, and we've not actually taken them to court, but they had someone do a knockoff of Regulator to get around the licensing.
Just bothering to pay someone.
Yeah. So whenever I'm abroad, I'll see whatever the localized version of Walls Ice Cream is in Italy. I can't remember what it's called, but there it is on a parasol outside.
Eye starts twitching, and you just start
I think
I'll show them someday. Yeah. But in a good way, do you see? Did you have those experiences of well, that's one of mine, you know?
There's been a few months ago. I was walking through Paddington Underground Station, and there's a long corridor, and there were billboards down the entire length of both walls. It was a good sort of 5-10 minute walk down this long corridor, and every single one of them had Korolev on at a cap height of about a metre. It was quite an impressive. It was almost like a sort of gallery show of type. So it is always exciting to see your work in the wild, and you design these things without content. I mean, the bizarre thing about designing type is you're designing the form, but you're not designing the content. So the content is what the person who buys the font and uses the font fills it with. And I think these ads were for some soft drink or something. I can't remember what. You have absolutely no control over who you
once you've licensed
how
out.
People use your font.
Yeah.
So you'll see them on a book jacket or advert, or the trailer for Frankenstein.
Yeah.
The new Del Toro version uses Worthington Arcade, which I was very happy with. There was an episode of Poker Face where one of the characters had one of my fonts on a hat.
I remember you posted that on Instagram.
Yeah.
I saw that first and then saw the episode. I'm like, that's Ryan's font for the hat.
So it's just bizarre. I mean, there's a digital file that I drew upstairs in the studio that has somehow travelled across the world and been stitched onto a patch somewhere in the US that's been sewn onto this hat, and then someone has filmed someone wearing this hat, and then that digitally has been transferred all the way back here again to the room below where it was designed, where I've watched it on
Almost
TV.
exactly. I could see the TV is right here.
Yeah.
It's where your studio
But it's
was.
gone from there to there, which is a space of about 3 or 4 meters, but there's circumnavigated the globe to do that. That's always an interesting phenomenon, and sometimes I'll design fonts where I think this is obviously going to be a bestseller. It's a very generic font. Everyone can use this for everything, and no one does. And then
it's the same thing I do with the show. I always have the guests who I think, well, this one is going to be the nope. Crickets. And then it's the most obscure, strange guest that I have. I'm like, I'm the only person who's going to be interested in this guy's project, but I'm going to do this episode. That's the one that blows through the roof. Yeah.
There was a font that I did called Battery Park, and it was called Battery Park because I was in a taxi in New York, and it was raining, and this van pulled up beside the taxi, and it had lettering on the side that someone had done with a really crude stencil and a spray gun for plumbing supplies. And I took a picture of this van through this rain-spattered window. And then some years later I came across this, and I was looking for some type for a project probably for a comic book logo, which needed to be quite rough and eroded. And so I pulled this photograph into Photoshop and straightened it up and adjusted the contrast, and then auto-traced the letters and lifted them out and arranged them for this piece of design. And then a few more years passed, and I came across this again, and I thought I could probably create a whole alphabet for that. So I did. And so however many years after the event, this finally got released as a font, and I thought no one is going to want to use this. And it just sold and sold and sold. So on the one hand, there was this versatile family, and most of the time the versatile families do sell. But I was leaning into thinking, I should do something really popular and commercial, and that didn't work. And then this personal project that I, quite frankly, almost didn't release ends up by just selling and selling. And I see that everywhere. Like there's a Banksy exhibition in Tottenham Court Road at the moment, and they've used it for this Banksy exhibition. There was a paperback called AK-47, The History of the World's Favourite Gun or something, and that has it on the cover. I just come across it again and again. There's a couple of comic books that use it on the cover at the moment as well.
This feels like, even though it's only typefaces, but we know how important that stuff is, that it fits every other art form the same way. We all have the things we chase, thinking, well, okay, this is safe, I'll do this. And it just doesn't hit where, again, the stranger the personal thing is, the more you discover that, wow, there's a whole lot of other people who are really into this. So, as we're discovering with this Kickstarter.
Yes.
Speaking of, has the experience so far with this Kickstarter given you ideas for future projects?
Yeah, I think that the beauty of Kickstarter is it's just you and the audience, whereas if you work through a regular publisher, which is what I've always done, and not holding anything against regular publishers, but the fact that the publisher has to make a profit, and then they sell to the distributor, and they have to make a profit, and the distributor sells to the bookshop at probably half cover price, and the bookshop has to make a profit, is that you have to come in at, 20% of cover price or something like that. So your margins are very narrow. So you either have to print a lot of copies to bring the unit cost down, which
leaves you with boxes and boxes and boxes of copies, or things getting pulped.
Yeah, which there is a limited audience for books about typography. So you're not going to sell 10,000 copies. You might sell 1,000 if you're lucky. But the beauty of Kickstarter is because you miss out several of these these
middlemen.
These intermediate stages. You are, as long as you sell at a price that the people who back your Kickstarter are prepared to pay, you're fine. So you don't, if the book costs 60% or 80% of the price that the backer is paying, you still make 20% or something like that. That would be completely impossible if you were doing it through the regular route. Mm-hmm. So it's possible to do, Typeractive is probably going to be 600 pages, around A4, so that's a sizable chunk of a book. This is to mirror those catalogues, like I say, that Caslon and...
I've been eyeing them here at your house. I've been looking at these things thinking, that's where we're going here.
Yeah, okay. So this is my hubris of, I have got to make a catalogue that looks like these old type founders' catalogues.
It's respecting the work you have done and making sure you're among your peers.
Exactly.
That's what I'm going with on this.
Yeah. But it is possible to do this at very low print runs. So we can do this and do a really nice job without cutting any corners. And we didn't even go with a printer in China or somewhere where they're really cheap. This is a British printer. And we've already covered our costs twice over. So everything else is just gravy. So if we hit several hundred backers, we can still do a very high production job that would be impossible any other way. So it's kind of win-win, I think.
And the time frame, I'm sure, is also much. You can do things more quickly if you do the design, etc.
Yes.
Than conventional publishing, where it has to fit into their seasonal schedules and be booked out year plus in advance.
With both the novels, with XX in particular, you would talk to publishers and they would say, well, we have a hole in our 2028 list. And you would be thinking, that's like 3 years' time.
Will I be here?
Yeah. I'm going to be able to put out, at this rate, another 3 novels before I'm dead. Yeah. So there's these incredibly long lead times that I find enormously frustrating, especially if you're used to working in advertising or comics, where everything is
boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, exactly. When I was working at 2000 AD, you'd hand the pages in. They would be printed and in the shops within a matter of weeks. There was, and when you were working on, say, weekly magazines as an illustrator, you would be given an article. You would probably have a day or two to do the illustration, and it would literally be in print the next week, and then you'd be on to the next one and on to the next one. And so these interminably long waits that you find in mainstream publishing, I just find enormously frustrating. The whole industry seems to move so slowly. And so again, this just pulls all of that frustration away from other people who, quite frankly, should just pull their fingers out and move a bit faster, and gives you control over all of this. And I don't think that the kind of books that I'm doing are not going to be, multi-million bestsellers.
They wouldn't be the publisher's, superstar project.
No.
And you don't want to get lost.
They're niche products for the connoisseur.
And, we talked before recording about the extras idea and the things you put into it. I contributed to this Kickstarter at the £95 level because I like the...
well done. Thank you very much. We appreciate your contribution.
The slipcase you do. As long as it doesn't cost another £95 to ship it to the US with everything that's going on, I'll be happy. But yeah, coming up with the idea for extras and things you wanted to
well, again, with XX and Black Locomotive, we did a signed edition, which had a separate ISBN, and that was done through Picador, which again is offered to the book trade, presumably as an incentive. But what we found is how willing people were to pay for something a bit more special. So with Ray Guns and Rocket Ships, for example, we had the regular edition, and then we had a slipcase edition, and I think we had a signed slipcase edition as well.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go that far with that one, but I did do the slipcase.
Yes. And so the idea is that I assumed that everyone would want to just go for the cheapest option, and no one would buy these more expensive options. Why would you? It's pretty much the same with a slipcase and a bookplate and a few other add-ons, postcards, bookmarks, what have you. But I was astonished at how many people were really into that. So with Typeractive, for example, the slipcase edition is pretty much on a par with the regular edition in terms of popularity, even though the regular edition is £45 and the slipcase edition is £95. There's a lot of people out there who appreciate a nice slipcase
and you do the other extras. You're giving them some fonts and other choices to be part of. But
yeah. So again, I mean, if you're into the beautiful book as an object, and I think a lot of graphic designers are, it enables you to indulge yourself as a designer in all of these sort of extras and make the spec a bit better, and you can have ribbons and headbands and all these other things that if you were working with a regular publisher, they'd be sucking on their teeth. And
well, that's going to raise a unit cost.
Yeah, exactly. You want a spot varnish? You want a metallic Pantone? Wow. So, there are, I mean, the benefits of selling books through regular bookshops is that you do reach an audience who are completely unaware of Kickstarter or are not in your...
Yeah, they're not as online necessarily.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you are limited in other ways to the audience that you can reach, for sure. But what we did with Ray Guns and Rocket Ships is after the Kickstarter had finished, we reprinted... I can't remember what the reprint was. But anyway, that sold out. And so that went out through Carrero Press, through their normal print distribution, through Amazon and what have you. So it was available in the shops as a sort of secondary thing 6 or 8 or 10 months later, which is a model that I think a lot of other people do. I think Simon Stellenhag's beautiful books, The Electric State, which was made into a TV show, was originally a book. I can remember backing some of his early books on Kickstarter, and they subsequently were published by Jonathan Cape, I think, in pretty much a similar kind of edition. But what you didn't have was the book plates and the pouch at the back with the posters in and all the extras that you get if you back his Kickstarter.
So is it giving you ideas for future projects? Or do you just want to get through this one first before figuring out what...
Definitely. I'm trying to think. And there's I did a book of burlesque art through Image Comics about, 8 years ago now. And that was all culled from drawings that I did from life. And I was still doing these drawings after that book came out, and I've probably got more than enough now for another volume of that. Whether that would find an audience or not, I don't know. Who knows?
Do you feel like there's a Rian Hughes audience, or an audience for your type, for your prose?
I don't think...
I'm asking straight up.
Yeah, I
think there is, but
I don't think there's... I mean, I think that the people who bought Ray Guns and Rocket Ships were primarily into vintage sci-fi art. I don't think they were necessarily bothered by who designed it or edited it. I think there's probably an audience for my novels, but whether that audience are interested in a book of typography without a narrative, I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, I don't really think about it that way. I don't think, what is the audience? I think, what is it that I fancy doing, and how can I sell that and make that into a functional project that isn't just completely and utterly self-indulgent that 2 people will read. So
I sort of wonder how you chase the things you care about and whether an audience comes along, and whether it's a discrete audience from, project to project, or if it's people who I trust whatever Rian is up to, I'm going to follow, the next step and see what he's doing next. Not that you are chasing that, but that they're following, once you start to build
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. I think that,
because they seem like discrete things, but feed into each other. Someone who cares about XX and Black Locomotive is going to care about typography. They're not simply a science fiction reader of a certain kind, and that's going to lead into other areas of interest of yours. But those bleed into each other.
I would imagine there's an overlap, but I would think it's a smallish overlap. But I'm okay with that. I mean, I think one of the things that I've kind of hamstrung myself with career-wise is being a bit too scattershot about what I do. So, I can remember. I even had, in my early days, I had 3 separate portfolios. So if I went to an interview somewhere, I would have like an illustration portfolio. I'd have a graphic design portfolio. I actually had a photography portfolio as well. In fact, my photography is on the website. And after a while, I just thought, I'm just going to stick all of these in one portfolio because that's what I do.
Yeah.
And if people have a problem with this versatility, then that's their problem, not my problem. And I did run across people who would say, well, we're really after someone who does X, and X would be a very specific kind of children's book, for example. And they would not be able to get their head around the fact that someone who probably designed logos and did illustrations of burlesque dancers might possibly be able to do a children's book.
These skills will be able to...
Yes, but then I'd done a record sleeve with Jerry Halliwell, and then when Jerry Halliwell decided to write some children's books, she specifically asked if I would like to draw these children's books. So then the publisher is almost compelled to go along with this. So against their normal way of thinking, I get hired to do a children's book, which turned out fine.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a conservatism among a lot of the people who commission work, where they want what you have already done, and don't like the idea of you bringing more to the table or skills that lay outside of the specific remit for this job to the table. And you're just going to scare them. They're going to assume that they might get something that they're not expecting.
This is the commission. We just want someone who will only do exactly what we ask, but we don't know exactly
Well,
what
I've literally been into ad agencies where they'll have a mood board. I loathe mood boards. They'll have a mood board and they'll have, I don't know, a dozen of my illustrations and a bunch by other people who maybe draw in a similar fashion to me, stuck on a mood board. And they've already sold this in to the client. And your job is basically to lift a head from this illustration that you did from someone else 5 years ago and a body from over here, and combine them in this layout they've already designed, and they're happy. And it's kind of, early on in my career, because advertising work was very well paid, I was quite happy to do this. But from a creative point of view, you're bringing absolutely nothing of yourself to this. You are literally a hired hand that is executing someone else's idea. The content of the drawing is decided by someone else. What the drawing is saying, the strap line, what it's advertising, all these are decided by someone else. And as a graphic designer, more often than not, most of those fall into your realm. You are the person who is deciding how you would approach a specific job. Illustrators tend not to have that degree of creative control that graphic designers or art directors do. And because I was also doing graphic design and art directing, it annoyed me enormously.
to be boxed in.
Yeah, especially, I mean, I can remember there was one ad agency, I can't even remember their name, not a very big ad agency, and they were doing a lot of work for a company that made printers, just printers that you would hook up to your computer or something like that. And they'd come up with this campaign, and they wanted a picture of a blonde woman, and they'd done this rough that they showed me, and it said, "Free blonde with every printer," and then there was an asterisk, and there was some caveat at the bottom. And I was just, I just thought, I'm kind of embarrassed to be drawing this shit. And it was very well paid, and I found an old illustration that I'd done for someone else, and I made the woman blonde and sent them the file and invoiced them. But I just thought, this is not how I want to spend my life. That's not to say that there wasn't a lot of work that I did with other art directors where they really valued the fact that I brought a bit more intelligence to the table, a bit more, personal thinking to the table. Yeah, that I wasn't just literally someone who could execute someone else's idea, but honestly, there were a lot of people out there who just literally wanted you to do exactly what you were told. Yeah. We're getting a bit off the fox.
No. And that's part of my thing. We're gonna, migrate all over the place, because last time we recorded about 2.5 years ago for Black Locomotive, at the time, you talked a bit about, using Midjourney and some other AI tools as far as illustration went, just, working with them or playing with them, really, to figure out what you could do. How has that progressed? Has your approach to that stuff changed, or has AI changed, what you do?
I'll play with it. When Midjourney was fairly new, they did a kind of pre-release, and I managed to somehow get access to it prior to it going public. And this was a fairly early version of Midjourney. But I remember being absolutely enthralled by this. And if you talk to people in the world of comics or illustration, and you talk about Midjourney or DALL-E or these other AI image generation things, you might as well have announced yourself to be a Satanist.
By the way, I'm a white supremacist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But and it's not that I don't understand that it is literally trawling the internet and all the material on the internet. In fact, I know for a fact that XX and Black Locomotive are part of the data set that is used by
that Anthropic, or the one that got sued. Yeah.
So there was a court case that is settled, and I can't remember what my payment was from that, but some low number of thousands or something like that. But multiply that by however many people that they filched work from, and it is a not insubstantial amount of money. Yeah. So I've been on the receiving end of this, but I think that first of all, it's inevitable. I don't think there's anything we can do about it. Second of all, I'm old enough to feel that I'm not particularly threatened by this. I'd imagine if I was 20 or something like that, I might feel slightly different about it. Yeah. So, that's just me being possibly a bit protected from this.
But that's why I'm asking your opinion, not what everyone's opinion should be. So.
But I also think, like with any of these tools, there are good and bad ways to use it. And I remember when Photoshop was new, and I can remember the absolute outrage from photographers, who were they were even anti-digital cameras.
Film is the only true medium.
Yeah, they were soulless. You couldn't be a true artist. All this kind of stuff. And then eventually there is no photographer that I know who doesn't work with some digital tools along the way. So it just became part of everyone's tool set and everyone's process. And I think the same will happen with AI. And I think that there were a lot of people in the early days of Photoshop who would just scan in things they found, steal them, recolor them, flip them. There was a lot of very poor illustration that just montaged together found elements. But there was also a lot of amazing stuff that came out of that would have never happened before. And I'd also draw parallels with the early synthesizers, and there was a great deal of pushback from the musicians' union. Everyone had these keep music live stickers on their flight cases, because musicians were going to lose work, and these computers were just going to kill music stone dead and take the soul out of music. But if it wasn't for the computers, hip-hop would have never have happened, electronica would have never have happened.
I recorded with Thomas Dolby years ago, and it was he had a memoir talking about how difficult it was working with those tools when you were starting, when the technical limitations for synthesizers were not what they are now. And it was literally like changing discs in the middle of a performance, trying to get the other samples in so that you could play it in time. And, but it created a different set of creative parameters for you in the process.
Yeah. And I also think that there's a schadenfreude in the fact that since the Industrial Revolution, skilled working class people have had jobs vanish overnight. If you were, I don't know, a weaver or think of some technical.
Well, we still go with the horse and buggy.
Yeah, and some new innovation comes along, and the thing that you did, your mother or father did, and your grandparents did, no longer exists. And I think that a lot of the squealing is coming from the kind of middle upper classes, and I just feel like saying, well, welcome to the club. This has been happening to working class people for generations, and maybe you should have stuck up for them along the way. Yeah. But also, I think that AI will probably cure cancer and give us new drugs and do a bunch of other amazing things as well. So, swings and roundabouts.
But good. Yeah, I just had no idea from, like, when it really started, it was you and Dave McKean had put out a book of, like, 3 vignettes, basically, of, like, him experimenting with those systems when they started, and how far we've come in such, 3 or 4 year span of the changes that have occurred. Now the entire economy is being driven by all the investment in this stuff. But yeah, seeing how it impacts what you do or whether it does, something I've been curious about.
I think
I can't imagine within typography if there's it can't figure out letters. So
no, it's very very bad with vectors. Bizarrely, I went to an exhibition a few weeks ago that Monotype put on, where they had various posters up where they had, say, a limited character set, and then they were showing how AI had interpolated some of the missing characters, and honestly, they were unworkable. And if this is the best that AI can do in type design at the moment, it's not very good. But I think that's because it's primarily pixel-based, not vector-based. Yeah. And I think that ultimately it will crack vector-based design. We'll get there. And there's a lot of stuff in type design, like spacing and kerning and very repetitive parts of the process that you need to pay attention to and need to perfect, because that's the difference between a
lowercase
good, beautiful font and one that just isn't a professional standard. And there's a lot of that could be streamlined for sure. But the experimentation that I've personally been doing with Midjourney, very little of it has found its way into my commercial work. It's just something that I play with and explore on the side, and occasionally I'll come up with an image that I might use, but it's rarely, if ever, an image that looks like anything that you could have made any other way.
The lighting has always been weird, and a lot
of the imagery. I mean, I post bits and pieces on Instagram occasionally, and there's a whole load more that I haven't posted, but I probably will get around to after this Kickstarter is over. It's a bit like a friend of mine sort of described it as it's a bit like you're tunneling down into the sort of shared psyche of humanity by prompting it with various phrases and just seeing what it regurgitates out at you. And the most interesting results I found are when you are vague or not too specific, and it has to sort of make a judgment or a guess. Yeah. And so I was doing a series of images where the description was something along the lines of person, not person, or no person. You can put a double hyphen in and the word no, and it'll not do that thing, or it'll treat that as a negative prompt. So I was trying to tell it to do something and then telling it to do the opposite of that thing. And I got these incredible images where I would get like group shots of like children at the seaside that looked like a Victorian shot. I posted some of these on Instagram. Yeah. And then amongst these kids, there would be some monster or apparition or creature. And I hadn't described this thing. I hadn't said draw me a bug-eyed monster, but this is what its interpretation of a no person or a not person.
So this is my big fear with this stuff, is that if they ever do manage to achieve sentience, they're going to remember that we were fucking with it the whole time, and I might live an extra couple of milliseconds because I didn't do that stuff. But I just think they're going to wipe us all out pretty quick.
Well, they're going to hold a grudge.
Yeah, we messed with them as much as we did when they were children. Just starting to figure out what they could do. But maybe I'm.
I think it's an interesting time we live in for sure, and I think that for designers or artists or musicians of my age, to have begun your career in the purely analog world and then seen the digital sweep in and completely transform what we do, and it's still we're still on that journey. It still is nowhere near ending if it ever does. It's been a really exciting time, and long may it continue. So maybe it's just my natural optimism coming through. I don't think that AI is the death of art. I think it's produced an enormous amount of very derivative material, but I think that you just need a discerning audience who doesn't want derivative material. I mean, there are enough people out there who will quite happily go to a more expensive, nice restaurant rather than McDonald's.
Or will support a 600-page font Kickstarter. That's also, Or listen to a podcast.
There's room for everyone. Yeah.
Let me, as getting away from the AI question, graphic design that has just knocked your socks off, not by you. Do you have moments where that is a very good piece of I wish I had made that, or I wish I'd been the.
All the time.
Yeah.
I think that inevitably, as you get older, you encounter novel music, graphic design, novels less often, just because you have more life experience. But human creativity and the willingness to experiment and the magic of the novel and the new will never cease to amaze me. And that's not to say there's a lot of material out there that I just do not understand or doesn't connect with me. But then, I'm not 15 or 16, and I don't spend 12 hours a day on Korean gaming forums and speak whatever the lingo is of Gen.
I spent about an hour getting here from London City Airport on trains and just seeing everybody's phones and what they were watching, and like the TikToks and everything else, the video streams of things. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm looking at over on this person. So everybody's got their feeds going, and they've got some, subcultures that are completely important. I would say completely important or dominant in their worlds that I just find completely alien. And to be straight, none of them are saying, I need to listen to an hour or two of Gil and Rian Hughes discussing typefaces.
Well, on the one hand, people say that everyone has a very short attention span because the average TikTok video is 30 seconds maybe. But then long-form interviews do extremely well. The fact that there are podcasts out there where literally two people will shoot the breeze for 2 or 3 hours and they have 1 million views astonishes me. So again, if there is stuff out there that will suit you, and there's stuff out there that will suit someone else.
Now, I will say, as far as stuff that suits me goes, and things you've been referencing occasionally through this conversation, you have XX and the Black Locomotive. You've referred to a new novel periodically, or a third novel occasionally during this talk. You sent me a PDF yesterday of can you talk at all?
The new novel is called The Absence, and it's finished. Maybe this will be the next Kickstarter. Who knows? It is the closest description I have for it, and I dislike these elevator pitch descriptions, because again, they're a bit like mood boards that I was describing earlier, is that they show you things that already exist and say it's a bit like that.
This cross with that.
Whereas I think that obviously as an artist what you want to do is something that doesn't already exist in some way, shape or form. But the best short description I can give is a kind of metafictional Cavalier and Clay set in the British pulp and comic book publishing world, covering about 100 years. So it begins with a small press on the banks of the Thames in Hammersmith, which is modelled after the Kirwin Press. There were several small presses around during that period, sort of inspired by William Morris's Kelmscott Press, for example. And I borrowed a lot of history from that. And then I imagined that this small press then evolved to be a major publishing concern, a bit like a sort of British Marvel Comics, say. And then I basically worked in through this various analogues and pastiches of British comics and characters that have no analogue to existing characters. So my main superhero is called Steeplejack, and his kind of nemesis is called the Absence. But it's told from the point of view of an advertising, a sort of weary, seen-it-all advertising guy who has a company called Theory and Practice, and he's hired by this conglomerate who have just bought this sort of British publishing concern and all of its back catalogue, and are mining it for characters that they can use in movies and merchandise and all the rest of it. And his job is to somehow, first of all, see what it is that they've bought, and second of all, how they can exploit this. And they're training in the basement of this building where this publishing concern exists, where they have the archive. They're basically scanning the archive, millions of pages, and they're feeding it into an AI. And the AI is kind of hallucinating the characters, these fictional characters, while it's writing film scripts and coming up with novel ways that this can all be commercially exploited. And so first of all, it's about the barriers between fact and fiction. And of course, because it is fiction, it's a novel that I wrote, so the non-fictional characters in my novel are also
everybody
fictional.
is,
And it's also about the power of design, the power of the logo. So I thought if you're an advertising guy, you know how powerful branding is. So you can have a very average pair of jeans or a handbag, and then if you put a Prada logo on or a Gucci logo on, all of a sudden this becomes a much more desirable and expensive status piece. And the trick that the makers of, say, designer jeans realised is that if you this value is transferable to yourself. So if you walk around with a massive Tommy Hilfiger or whatever logo across your chest, it is lending you some kind of status and gives you a kind of uplift in terms of confidence and all these things that superheroes have. So I wondered whether Superman is actually a superhero who pretends to be a normal man, or if he's a normal man that just happens to have a brand on his T-shirt that behaves in exactly the same way that a Prada logo might for a guy from an estate somewhere who has his gold chain and his
Burberry.
Yes, exactly. You know, these signals of quote-unquote success and status. I mean, obviously, in the fictional world of Superman, that's not the case. But I thought, maybe these powers of flight or super strength are actually not unrelated to the kind of uplifting confidence, the drug-like uplifting confidence that people get when they put on a piece of brand label clothing. So my main ad agency character, who's called Adam Sinclair, early on in the novel, he says, "Never wear a logo. Logos are merch. Logos are for the fans. The bands never wear their own logo. They're for the followers." And eventually, of course, one day he puts on a Steeplejack T-shirt because they're working with the company that now owns Steeplejack the Hero, and something weird happens, and the lines between whether you can actually fly or not become blurred, whether the characters via the AI somehow are bleeding out into the real world become more diffuse, and whether the characters in my novel, which again, they're obviously fictional, but when you're reading a novel, you kind of accept the conceit that there are fictional and non-fictional characters in a fictional piece. So I play with all of these tropes, against each other, and try and push them to their most sort of extreme examples, and just sort of see where that takes me. But also towards the end of the novel, I also try to work in a kind of almost regular superhero versus supervillain fight, but without a single punch being thrown. How are they going to figure this out? Because if the absence, whose his kind of power, if you like, is that he can sort of just erase things. He is in the archive, erasing the archive, so that the AI, whose mind is literally the archive, is suffering from a kind of digital version of Alzheimer's as this supervillain works his way through the archive, deleting everything. And the physical copies of the magazines that have bound volumes are becoming just blank pages in the real world.
Yeah.
In the real world. So these are all played against each other, and our character gets pulled down into a fictional world that may or not be real. And it goes on from there. Long
elevator ride, but I appreciate the pitch. It's from the pages I looked at in the PDFs last night, I'm looking forward to it, finding a publisher and getting out in the world.
Well, that's my next challenge. But it's got sections that are written as a regular novel. It's got, like with XX and Black Locomotive, it's got sections that are written as magazine articles. As they explore as one of our other characters explores the archive and finds out more about the history of the company, you get old comics, old magazines sort of inserted into the narrative. Yeah. So some of the comic strips I drew, Sean Phillips did me one set in the kind of 70s. David Roach did me a really nice romance pastiche set in the late 60s. There's a kind of Commando picture library World War II pastiche in there. There's a sort of Rupert the Bear pastiche. And all of these sort of exist in the archive as sort of analogues of the history that we're familiar with of sort of big British comic and pulp and cartoon character publishing. So it's been great fun from a graphic design point of view, and homaging a lot of characters that I'm familiar with, and sort of touching on certain stories that have how certain creators have had their work taken away from them, and sort of died in penury while their characters went on to earn vast amounts of money for the publishing company that now owns them. I mean, again, the history of English comics, just like the history of American comics, is full of young, naive creators getting completely ripped off. So it touches on that as well.
So I then, again, look forward to seeing it. The question that I always ask, what have you been reading?
What have I been reading?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. I'll have to think about this. What have I been reading?
Should have warned you. I didn't.
Yeah. I have a subscription to New Scientist, which arrives every week, and every week is a bit too often for me to get through every issue. But that I find fascinating, just because I'm fascinated by science, but also it sort of keeps you up to date with everything from AI to discoveries in the world of physics or biology or culture.
And you get the Tom Gauld strip in that every...
yes, you do.
Yeah.
I have to pause for a minute now.
Yeah, you can email me afterwards with I can't believe I forgot I'm doing X. Has there been a novel or comic that has really floored you of late?
I should be looking around the table here, actually. I mean, most of the books, as you'll see here, are either sort of vintage comics or design books or type catalogues.
Or Wittgenstein? For gosh sakes, you're trying to make me feel worse.
There's a book there called Basilisk by Matt Wixie, which I was asked to blurb. I was very happy to blurb, which does interesting things with text and layout.
Largely a prose novel?
It's a prose novel, yes. So I quite enjoyed that. There's an Eddie Campbell book there, look.
Hey, from hell.
Yes. I'm enjoying Kieran Gillen's The Power Fantasy, which I design, but I really love Kieran's kind of sense of metatextual pop culture mashups that he does. There's a book on the history of puffin design. Some indie comics. A book on street signs in Italy. The new EC line, which I'm also designing, which I've written a story for that just came out in the latest issue, which is the first time I've ever written a comic script that someone else has drawn.
What was that like?
It was interesting. Yeah. It was, it was... I mean, obviously, if you're an artist as well, you have very specific ideas as you write a script of how it might look, and it didn't look anything like that.
So were you writing it for a specific artist, or were you just...
No, I just wrote it, and then they assigned the artist.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that was fun.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I am going to turn into a full-time comic book writer anytime now.
But trying it and just seeing what, how it's different than when you do it yourself.
But it's... I'm always interested in ways that I can challenge myself to do something new in the kind of broadest realm of comics, graphic design, typography, and if an opportunity presents itself that I think might be interesting and might stretch me in some new way, I'll be very happy to lean into that and just see what happens.
Which, as I was saying, is the Rian Hughes experience. That's what I think. There are people there who will say, I will follow this guy because I know what he's doing. I'll put it this way. Yeah. This goes back to my pharmaceutical stuff today. I was at a trade show in Frankfurt this morning and then flew out here. And we have a new member company, and the guy said to me, the CEO of this Indian pharma manufacturing firm, he said, I just want you to know, it's not about the things that you're advocating for specifically. That's not why I joined. It's because when we had our conference call, the passion that you show for what you're doing for the industry was enough to convince me we need to be part of this, because I saw that you actually care about doing this job. This isn't so tooting my own horn, and tuning in the pharmaceutical space as opposed to the podcast stuff. But I think that comes out in all of your projects. There is a Rian Hughes sensibility, even if it's something you're finding out about yourself in the artwork on the fly. You know,
I think that I'm never bored.
Yeah.
Never bored. And I'm very lucky in that I sort of get up every morning and I'm full of the possibilities of what I can do that day. And I'm very, very lucky in that what I do appears to have some kind of audience. So it's not just me masturbatorily doing this all on my own for my own enjoyment. There does seem to be people who respond to this. And I've also been very lucky that these things that I want to do are commercial, and by and large there are people out there who are enough on my wavelength who will employ me to do these things. I mean, working on the EC Comics redesign was an absolute joy because I love EC Comics. I've got the box sets in the library, and it's an absolute classic brand. And to just sort of have an email from Oni Press and Hunter at Oni, who I worked with previously on the Valiant redesign, asking me if I'd like to get involved with these things. I mean, these are just wonderful gifts.
Like twist my arm.
Yeah, exactly. And so I am exceedingly lucky that I have people who trust me with these projects and want to get me involved in these projects. And sometimes I'll find myself complaining that I need to get on with the next novel, and then I'm thinking, Ryan, you're saying to yourself, you're designing too many EC covers, and you'd rather get on with it. I mean, come on, please, get a grip.
It's not like I have to go work in the mine.
Yeah,
and then I'll
exactly.
get a chance to.
May these be my problems. Yeah. I mean, with things like the novels, I think that for the longest time I knew that that's where I wanted to go. I mean, for 30 years I thought, this is something I want to try. But I was so sort of busy with other commercial work. It wasn't that I was out there. I very rarely, if ever, I think there's like 2 or 3 things I've ever pitched for in my life. Just because I specifically wanted to do this thing. And everything else has just sort of
shown up.
Yeah, it has. Or I've had a conversation with someone where I'll express an interest in something, or I'll say, I used to love X. And 2 weeks later, someone has spoken to someone who's spoken to someone, and X has given me a call and said, would you like to do this? Which is, a wonderful position. I'm very, very lucky to be in that position. But I think also you have to sort of step back a bit sometimes and think, I don't have all the time in the world. I have a limited number of, hopefully, decades sort of on planet Earth. How do I really, really, really want to spend my time? And I think that that's where XX came from. And when that proved to be a reasonable success and found an audience, it encouraged me to do more of these things. So, and this was the same with the fonts in a way, is that yes, I was being commissioned to draw fonts, but I found that the fonts that I enjoyed designing and I thought were better fonts were the ones that I was doing for myself. Yeah. So you're faced with this choice where it's great to be commissioned to do a font for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles rebrand, but that font is not... It's not going to push back the boundaries of the art of typography into new territory. It works, it's functional, I like it. But it's just a very square, blocky font. It's nothing particularly special. So I could continue doing those things and being very well paid for it and working on, quite high-profile jobs. But then I also had to have this personal space where I was photographing the side of a plumber's van through a rainy window in New York and turning that into a font. And the bizarre thing is that quite often these side projects end up by being the more commercial projects. So that font, for example, like I said, just sold and sold and sold. And Paralucent and Korolev just sell and sell. And both of these were not commissioned by clients. They were just things that I had a specific idea and desire to do. So they end up by almost being more commercial than your commercial work, which again is a very lucky position to be in. I mean, of course, there's been many other fonts that I've spent weeks and months on that have never earned back the time that I spent on them. But I think you just have to put all this stuff out into the world, and some of it will stick and find people who respond to it.
It might be one project out there that needs that font.
Yeah.
You don't know it, they don't know it, and when it connects, it's this is perfect.
But I'm just happy to put. Yeah. And I'm quite prolific as well, so I think that if I put a lot of stuff out, hopefully more of it will connect.
Yeah.
If I put out 100 things and half of them connect, it's still going to be more than if I put out 20 things and half of them and 100% of them connect. Yeah. So the novels were one. The novel XX was the longest time that I had ever worked on a single project that was not a commercial project. I mean, it then subsequently found a publisher in Picador.
But it was on spec, we'll say, just made for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I literally wrote it, designed it. It looked exactly like the finished product. And then when I'd done that, I showed it through my literary agent and through various other connections I had. It ended up at Picador. But that's kind of what I'll do. I won't pitch things. Yeah. I'll just do the thing for the enjoyment of the doing of the thing. And I've got many, many more projects that have never ever left my computer. You know, they sit upstairs on a drive somewhere. You know, there are children's books. There are another 100 fonts in various stages of completion, a lot of which I've either abandoned or I don't have the interest. Yeah, I've got notes for... I've got fairly complete notes and thumbnails for a graphic novel, which I'm hoping to get to next year. I've got a very detailed outline for the novel that comes after The Absence, which I'm hoping to get to the year after that. But by the time I get to the year after that, I'll probably have an outline for some other thing.
Yes, you'll have also had the background work keeps going. Yeah.
So these things don't stop. You know, it's almost an obsession. It's almost like there's some kind of engine that just never ever puts on the brakes in my head. And it's I wouldn't wish it to be any other way. People try and convince me that meditation is a good idea, that you sort of sit there and empty your mind and you sort of lose all the stresses of everyday life and you become one with the world. And I'm like, fuck that. I love the kind of noise. It's not a noise in my head, but the busyness in my head, the kind of creative thrill ride that is my mental state. Why would I want to quieten that? You know, why would I want to shut that conversation down?
I getcha. Last question, which ties back to what you were just talking about, comes from the great Stephen Heller, past guest of mine, friend of yours, great graphic designer and graphic design guru. How does he have the time and patience to complete to finish so many complete alphabets?
That's a good question. I think that type design is illustrative of how almost every creative process is, in that in the early days of type design, as there is when you're doing an illustration or writing a novel, there's a period where it's kind of exciting and creative and interesting, but also slightly shapeless because you don't actually have a handle on what it is that you're doing. You have a handle on it in the broadest sense, maybe a kind of more thematic view of what you're doing. So with a font, it might be that you want something that looks like a kind of very hard-edged, professional, caring font. And I've just come up with that off the top of my head. But I think that fonts, the most interesting fonts that I've designed haven't been, what would it look like if I put a 30-degree angle on the top of a serif or something like that. That's not designing fonts. Designing fonts is thinking, what does this font say? How might it be used? What function in idea space does this font perform? And that's how I would approach a novel. It wouldn't. You become interested in the characters and their background and their inner life, but only because you sort of live with them. The point of the novel is, how might I use typography in an expressive manner to tell a story, and then everything is downriver from that. So I'll start with the kind of the broadest, most meta concerns I possibly can have, and then I'll work down to the particulars from there. I mean, I know there are other writers who will literally just create a few characters and see where they go. That's not the way I work. And there are designers as well who will just piece the whole thing together, page after page after page, whereas I'm always thinking, how does this piece of design sit within the cultural realm? What does it do? What does it say? I mean, EC Comics, for example, they obviously have a position within not only comic book history, but within the broader pop culture and culture in general. They have a certain look and influence and place in history that you have to understand and reference if you're going to delve into and relaunch and reboot EC Comics. So I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I'll also mention something, and this was brought home to me by one of my favourite designers, Peter Saville, who I'm sure many of your viewers many of your listeners will be familiar with. He was describing designing a single for Roxy Music, and you can either design a record sleeve by thinking, we need a picture of the band, or maybe a face shot of the artist looking at camera. We'll commission a photographer, take a picture of whoever it is. We need a logo at the top. All right, we'll get a lettering guy to do a logo. Right, there we go. Logo, photo, job done. And that was kind of, when I was sort of a jobbing illustrator, that's quite often what the kind of work you would get. Yeah. Someone would say, we just need a logo at the top, or we need an image to go here. You wouldn't be able to address
the concept overall.
Yeah, the concept. You wouldn't be able to step back from that and take a broader view of what the project was. And then Peter Saville was talking about this Roxy Music sleeve, and it's embossed to look like leatherette on a sort of sports car seat.
Yeah.
And the reason it's perfect is because it's the kind of object that would exist in the world of Roxy Music. So if you inhabited the high octane, glamorous international world of Roxy Music, this might be a thing that you would find in that realm. And it's that, and so I always try to design things that they're not just windows into a world, they're objects that come from that world into your world. And so XX is like it's like an apport from the world it describes, that's almost reaching out into the three-dimensional space that we inhabit. And the absence sort of foregrounds that by literally making the story about this happening to our characters in the story, while also being an object in itself. I forgot what the original question was.
Stephen Heller wonders how you have the time and patience to do so many complete alphabets. And I think we're getting across now that the creative force just keeps going and going.
Sorry, Steve. I got distracted. How do I find the time? I think because I find the time to do all of these things, because it's what I do that makes me happy and engaged, and the hours, you don't take account of the hours if you're just sort of in the zone, in the flow state, doing the thing. I would also say that I've produced all these fonts because it's been 30 years of designing fonts.
That's a standard question I sort of ask for people who have that long form practice. What's gotten easier? Like, are there aspects of it, not that it becomes mechanical, but that...
No, you definitely solve problems that you don't need to solve again. Yeah. So, for example, I'm very adept now at spacing a font, whereas I think early on there was so much trial and error because it is entirely visual. There's no mathematical or mechanical approach to doing this.
There's no an auto step that does it all.
I mean, there have people have tried to automate spacing and kerning, and the results have always been atrocious. And by the time you've gone through and checked it all, which you have to do in a professional font, it's actually quicker for you to do it yourself. So this is the sort of somewhat tedious tail end of the font design process. I was talking earlier on about sort of, the beginning of the process. It lacks shape, but it's kind of exciting as you sort of put it all together. And then as it takes form, you become embroiled in the more mechanical aspects of getting this thing down on paper or into the digital realm. And then there's a lot of editing and perfecting that happens at the end, where the creative stuff has already been done and all you're doing is perfecting the technical aspect. So it will be copy checking, just making sure your sentences in the novel flow elegantly, that you haven't repeated something on page 50 that you then go on to explain all over again on page 300, which can easily happen. So there's all this finessing, and the same process happens in fonts. You have to test and run printouts where you run through vast amounts of sort of word combinations just to make sure that everything is kerned and spaced. And
stress testing.
Stress testing. So you definitely become more adept at the mechanical back end stuff, and that becomes much faster. I now have specific methods that I use, and I know if I follow these methods, I will have spaced and kerned that font thoroughly and efficiently. And a few people gave me advice on that, but I think it's just developing an eye and getting into the zone and just chugging through it all. But I don't know, maybe I'm fast at all this stuff. I don't know. I had to be fast. When I was working in comics, I would draw 5 pages of comics over a weekend because I had all this other stuff going on, and the deadline would loom, and I'd put it off, and then I would have to crank through this stuff. And I would quite often stay up all night. I don't do that anymore.
We talked about that before recording, that it was one thing in one's 20s and early 30s to put that in. Now it's...
No, it's you just basically are stealing time from tomorrow in the end. You're not making more time. But there have been periods of, maybe even a year where I've not even touched font design because I've been involved in other things. So I'm quite surprised at how many fonts I've managed to produce. I would also say that when glyphs came out, I was struggling with FontLab. These are all the programs that font designers use. And FontLab, for my tastes, was way too technical and not intuitive enough. And then when glyphs, Mark Simonson, who's a very good type designer, recommended glyphs to me because I was using him for like tech support, and I think he was getting a bit fed up with it. So he said, Ryan, try glyphs. And glyphs is very good. It's streamlined. It has so many ways that simplify the repetitive aspects of the font design process. And the 2 guys who design glyphs, who make glyphs, are really responsive to questions as well. So if there's anything that I can't get to work, Sometimes within a matter of hours, they've sort of solved my issue and sent the files back to me, and they work. So that speeds all the technical issues up as well. So Glyphs is an absolute godsend for a font designer. I mean, one of the things that it does really well is interpolation. Mm-hmm. So you'll have masters at the extrema. So you might have an ultra bold and a very light weight, and then it'll interpolate 4 or 5 weights between them. Not perfectly, because not because it's doing the interpolation mathematically perfectly, but you need to adjust things so it's visually perfect. But there are also ways to do this as well. But it has all these very clever ways that automate a lot of the very repetitive aspects of font design. So it's now possible. I mean, when I designed Paralucent, for example, you couldn't have 20 weights in one file. They were literally 20 files each. One. I
remember
for each
the
weight.
old days. The IT. I forget what the file types were for fonts back in the
TTF, true type fonts. Yeah. But to design them, you had to have a different file for each one. So if you then find that you've got to make a minor adjustment to the lowercase a, and you realise that you've got to do this on all the other weights, you literally have to open 20 weights and adjust it 20 times and export it. Yeah. Whereas in Glyphs, it's all contained within the one file, and you can then just export all of your...
it'll cascade through the
and do all the adjustments throughout the weights. So I would say that a lot of my productivity in more recent years has been down to how brilliant Glyphs is.
Well, let Stephen know. And I'm looking forward to seeing all the decades of Typeractive. And I won't ask what the time frame is. I'm just going to be happy when this big box shows up at my house someday. And
well, it's probably about a third designed. So there's a few articles that are going in that are already written, or they're reprints of old articles. There's a new forward that I've written. Yeah, it's probably about a third done. I thought I needed, again, like I did with XX, I think I need to get to the point where with XX I actually finished the thing, but with this project I needed to get to the point where I knew what the project was, how many pages, what size it was, what the layouts looked like. I had to get it to a point where I was confident enough to sort of show it to people so that they might then back it. And I think with Kickstarter, you have to have something convincing that looks like, as near as possible, what they're going to get. Yeah. I mean, the Kickstarters that fail are the ones where it's too vague, or they haven't shown you remotely what it is that you're signing up for. No, you've got to be really explicit and enthuse people, so they're going to be excited to see this.
Taking in all these lessons for when I do mine in a couple of months. So, I may end up hitting you up for some design questions, but, we'll see where that goes from there.
Happy to help.
But Rian, thanks for making the time, and thanks for letting me into your home this time. I'm glad I got to see your place. Doing these remote ones is nice, but,
Yeah. Well, it's nice to meet in person and hang out, so my pleasure.
And getting to see the books. So thanks so much, man.
And that was Rian Hughes. Go support Typeractive on Kickstarter if you're listening to this before November 20th, 2025. There might be extra copies afterwards that he puts up for sale. No idea, but go support this thing. It looks gorgeous. And even if you're not a type nerd, I think it's going to be an absolutely beautiful design object. And you might just find yourself getting inspired by it. And that's sort of the point of everything Rian and I were talking about, the way he finds inspiration in things, the way he finds that creative force all the time. It goes counter to my whole thing about meditating for the purpose of ego death, but sure works for him. And I'm not one to say I'm getting more done than somebody else. So, I think this book might be inspiring. I think his other work will definitely pusher buttons. I'll put it that way. So check out Ryan's novels, XX and The Black Locomotive, and check out his site, ryanhughes.com, as well as devicefonts.co.uk, where you can learn more about his work, his art, his writing, other books that he's done, like the burlesque one, the other Kickstarters he's done, his design, all the typography. You can find all those fonts on devicefonts.co.uk. And I'm sure there's plenty more that I'm not thinking of. So I hope we really got across what a creative mind Ryan's got and how many different modes it works in. Also go to Instagram and Blue Sky, and you'll find him as Rian Hughes, all one word. And again, that's RianHughes. Thanks for listening to the Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast by telling other people about it. There's no better way to build an audience than through word of mouth. Also, visit Apple's podcast page for us and leave a rating and review. Every little bit helps, you know? You can also support the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or comic or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, email, DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long. It'll cut you off after that, so call back and leave another message if you do. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with our listeners, but I'd never run someone's message without their permission, so let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, I appreciate it, but don't give it to me. I've got a day job that pays the bills. You should give to individuals and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, all those crowdfunding platforms, where you'll find people who really need help just trying to make ends meet or get an artistic project going, covering medical bills or car payments or veterinary bills, and just a few dollars from you might make a real difference in their lives. Now, when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, but there are a lot of other things you can give to the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Election Funds, Planned Parenthood, and Women's Choice. There's a lot of things you can do with your money to try to help build a better world, so I hope you'll give. Now, our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You can visit my archives at vmspod.com to check out my 2018 conversation with Hal, where you can learn more about his art, his music, and more. And you can follow Hal on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. That's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download all our past episodes at Apple Podcasts and other podcast sources. And you can find all my episodes and sign up for the Virtual Memories Show newsletter at vmspod.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram and YouTube as vmspod. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.